Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar, New Technology for Stain Removal, Spot Dyeing, and More. Welcome to the webinar. We're thrilled you're here. I'm your host, Hannah Oates, and on behalf of ISSA, I welcome you. Before we get started, we're going to go over a few housekeeping items. One item is that you can ask questions throughout the webinar in your questions box that you have. If you're logged in on your computer, you should be able to see that panel on your screen. So we'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation, but please note we won't answer any of the questions until the presentation is over. So don't worry if you send in your question and you're not sure. We're monitoring that, we're looking at that, and we will try and make sure that that gets answered for you at the very end. And then a reminder that attendees of this webinar will receive a copy of the presentation by email within a week. If you're an ISSA member, you can access this webinar later on issa.com/TV by the end of next week. And now for our presenter. James B. Smith is an expert witness and color repair instructor who is affiliated with the IICRC and ISSA. His education includes 2 years of engineering at Texas A&M and a year as a student of chemistry at the University of Houston. He has written for the IICRC peer review journal 3 times. He has written for CleanFacts numerous times in recent months. His domain is www.carpetinspector.com. So James, to start us off today, you've provided a white paper detailing the content we are covering today, but give us a little sound off on algorithm theory or the new app that just came out.
I did, and thank you for that, Hannah. During this time of COVID-19, I had a chance to sit down and take a look at the apps that are available with smartphones that actually are able to give us numerical values of a red, yellow, and blue. I have always been told, and I've always been very interested in trying to stay on top of the latest technology and trying to make color repair easier, especially for people that might be colorblind or have some other anomaly going on. And I realized that there was a fundamental problem with that algorithm. You know, the problem was they were treating it as if it were a single problem. That is that the primary colors of light are red, green, and blue. The primary colors of dyes are red, yellow, blue. And the solution is you take a look at light and realize that red and green light make yellow. And that's where they stopped. No one ever stopped to realize that if you combine the green and the blue, you actually get light blue. And if you combine the blue and the red, you actually get something that's called magenta, you know, in the world of printers, which is kind of like a combination of dyes of light pink and light blue. So I sat down and applied those principles to an algorithm and came up with a new numbering system, a new way of figuring it. I've presented this to people that develop apps, and now these apps are beginning to come on the market. So I want to explain to you today, you know, how this technology can affect you, you know, especially if you're in the field of cleaning. And also talk a little bit about how this is integrated in with things like pH and ORP meters. So are you ready? Let's get started. What I'm going to show you basically is how to remove stains based upon meters. Okay, instead of just guessing as to what's going on, and how to tell the difference between a color loss, say from bleach, or a color loss from a toilet bowl cleaner. Bleach being an alkaline oxidizer, the toilet bowl cleaner being an acid, a strong acid. So those are some of the goals that are applicable, you know, for us today. Now, to get started with, I want to emphasize the fact that if you have studied science, and anytime we're going to get involved in cleaning, we have to study a little chemistry and a little physics. That any science that you study that doesn't use numbers is going to be somewhat ambiguous. I mean, and what I want to qualify here is what I call the essentials, you know, of science for anyone in the cleaning business. And I don't think they're going to be that complicated. One is going to be color. do we not always refer to everything by its color, but have you ever referred to color by numbers? The second topic is going to have to do with chemistry. Now, you may not be familiar with the term ionization, but you are, familiar with pH, which is the same thing. And then thirdly, oxidation reduction. Now, perhaps you're not familiar with that term either, but often in cleaning, we refer to bleaches, and that bleaches are either oxidizers or they're reducers. And that we are. So that's what the oxidation reduction is all about. So to get started with, we have to define what is color. And here's where some of the problems are. If you go to Google and you say, Google, what is color? You're going to come up with something that was meant for the ears of a scientist. You're going to find stuff like color. Now get this. Color is a characteristic of visual perceptions. It describes the unique bands of photon frequencies or their combinations, which are derived from stimulation of photoreceptors called cone cells. The reflection is going to be governed by the object's physical properties of light absorption and reflection. What does that really mean? It means that the object's color changes, when the light changes. In other words, objects don't have a color that they, they're on. The color is always a product of the kind of light that's being sent to it and what's going to bounce off. So here would be my layman's, redefinition of that. Color is going to be what we see. It's going to be describing, frequencies like radio frequencies, or bandwidths, of light. And we can do this because we have these three biological radio receivers behind our eyeballs called cone cells. And the point is, before we discuss color, we have to discuss what kind of light we're going to be using, what kind of light's being emitted off that object. If you've been out shopping for light bulbs, you notice that if you're buying your standard light bulb, it often comes in three varieties. All of them are called white, but one's a soft white, a bright white, and there's always something called daylight. Now, there's a standard for this. When manufacturers advertise their light bulbs, they're basing it upon an international body called the Commission on Illumination. The acronym for this group is called CIE. It's actually a French group called the Commission Internationale de Clarage, and they set standards. Now, their standard for being white light, would be, here it is, little technical. It is the degree which the stimulus can be described as similar or different from stimuli that are described as red, green, blue, and yellow. In other words, if you have something that is red, green, blue, and yellow, and you can distinguish the difference between those colors, then you have some form of white light. So let's discuss white light. First of all the radio frequencies that humans can see, if they're combined, make white. Meaning that if an object is white, you put that light on there, you're going to see white. But if we eliminate some of the colors that humans can see, and there must be, about a dozen colors, we find that only 3 colors can actually do the same thing. And those colors are red, green, and blue. And we call these primary colors because they cannot be made of other colors. So in other words, these 3 colors are able to do what all the other colors do in combination. Now, so what is white light? There are 3 ranges of white light. Now, this is important to follow for now. So keep this in the back of your mind. You don't necessarily have to memorize these numbers, but it'd be good to have them under, in reference. Soft white would be from 2,700 degrees to 3,000 degrees Kelvin. Kelvin is a unit of temperature. Don't worry about how we derive that right now. White light, bright white light, or cool white from 3,500 to 4,100. And daylight, from 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Kelvin. Now, what about this? Well, it's only the daylight form of a white light that has red, green, and blue in perfect balance with one another. In other words, if we have some way of deriving what the temperature of a light is, and we see that it's in that range, then we know that we're working exactly with the right kind of data, that our red, green, and blue data will be perfect. Now, what about color meters? I'm trying to introduce you to what a color meter is. And it's not all that new. Color meters were actually introduced to professional photographers before we actually had digital cameras. Now, I may be dating myself here, but in ages past, when we had chemical photography, we actually had to have film and wait for the film to be developed. You know, we quickly figured out that the pictures we got back sometimes look a little yellowish. You know, we wonder, where did this yellow come from? We don't remember seeing that yellow when we took the photograph. Well, that yellow was there. You know, the film captured it. The reason we didn't see it was because our brains are able to adjust the light in our heads, you know, so that we don't always realize that, or we're not always cognizant of that. Now, today we shoot mainly digital photographs. And because we're doing this digitally, digital, cameras are able to adjust the light, you know, through algorithms to make it white. And if you want to, you can go to your app store and just put in color meter, and you'll surely find lots of color meters out there that will tell you what the temperature of a light is. Now, aside from that, you're also going to see that some of these color meters also are going to give you data in CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and also RYB, which stands for red, yellow, and blue. Now, it's the red, yellow, blue that's the theory for dyes. And what I'm proposing to you today is that it's essential for doing color repair, and it would be very helpful to have an app like this, you know, if you're going to do color repair or even stain removal, as well as a whole lot of other things. So what we need to understand here is that there are actually three theories on color. Red, green, and blue measures the balance of light that humans can see. CMYK, you know, is what is used for opaque materials like inks. You may recall that if you have a color printer, you know, that there are 4 cartridges in there. And then RYB measures the colors of dyes. What's different between the dyes and the inks? The inks tend to be more opaque. They're dealing with bigger molecules. The dyes essentially are able to break down to single molecules and somewhat dissolve in water. And that changes the physics of how it, accepts and emits light. So each of these letters basically stands for a primary. A primary, once again, is something that we can't make from another color within that theory. Now, let's understand that technology or that terminology, a primary, and how does that differ from something that is called a hue? A hue would be a color that's actually found on some color wheel, whether that color wheel, is going to be red, green, blue, or CMYK or RYB. The thing that we need to understand is that the data on a smartphone is always received in red, green, and blue. If you can get numbers of red, green, and blue, those are the true numbers that represent that color. If you have another theory present, CMYK or RYB, those numbers are being derived from an algorithm based upon that data. So what kind of numbers? Well, generally the values are going to be on a system of 0 to 255. So a 0 for light would represent no light, 255 would represent, all that color could possibly do before it actually turns white. What might be more familiar for most of us is that they also break this into percentages. So either the numerical values will be from what? 0 to 255 or from percentages. So how would you use this? What would this mean to you? Why would the common guy out there taking care of a building or a carpet would want to have this kind of technology? Well, consider this. A color meter can tell us the difference between a stain or a color loss. And how would it do that? Well, the values in RYB for a stain will be higher than the surrounding carpet. If it's a color loss, they're going to be lower. And if we're going to do color repair, which I know a few of you do, but most of y'all live in fear of that, it can tell us how much of the dye needs to be replaced. So for the spot dyer, it gives us the perfect balance between red, yellow, and blue. Way beyond the human ability to do that. The color meters, based upon their 0 to 255 system, are able to discern 16.7 million different shades of color. Humans, they say that maybe we can distinguish a million. Some debate that. In other words, meters are the way to go. Something else too that I think the industry needs to start exploring is that when we do clean a facility and the light is the same, a cleaner building reflects more light. That's how we evaluate cleanliness. So a color meter actually could be a tool useful in discussing how clean the building is. So the red, green, and blue, once again, is the RGB is red, green, and blue, and that's a theory of light. And I need to point out something else to understand all this. This is called an additive theory. And what does that mean to us in simple terms? Well, because the more red, green, and blue light you get, the brighter it gets, the whiter things get. So it's an additive theory. When you add everything up, you get white light. The CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, and yellow and black. And it's the theory that printers have to use. Now, I want you to understand something about this, and this is important. Cyan, magenta, and yellow are the secondary colors, for light. In other words, if you mix the red and the green in perfect amounts, you get a perfect yellow. But this theory is what they call a subtractive theory, because the more cyan, pigment and magenta and yellow you mix together, the darker it gets. But here's the problem. Now get this, we see in three colors, but cyan, magenta, yellow, and all mixed together cannot make black. So to make this algorithm work so that we can actually take a printer and represent most of the things that we can see on a monitor, they had to add black in order to make it work. In other words, I didn't do this. Scientists, PhD, physicists, mathematicians saw that this was a reality. Now keep that in mind, because I use this type of understanding of color and algorithms to develop what I did. RYB, red, yellow, and blue, is also the color of dyes, but there's something bigger going on here too. Biology works off of red, yellow, and blue. Well, think about this. Most of us studied the RYB theory in kindergarten. Now, I don't know if you can recall, that time, but most likely, it's become intuitive to you. Do you not make evaluations on everything that you eat and your bodily fluids based upon that theory? You do. I mean, for some of us, if we were to see some orange in our urine, what would you do? Would you not call your doctor and say, "Doctor, I got a problem. My urine's looking a little bit orange"? What would that mean? Well, we intuitively know that, it seems like, but we don't. Actually, it seems intuitive because we were taught that, and everything that we experience is based upon that. These other theories don't seem so intuitive to us. How you can mix, blue and yellow and end up with white doesn't seem natural. In other words, it takes looking at a meter to understand that. But the RYB theory does make black. So how does a meter work? Well, first of all, it collects, electronically how much red, green, and blue values are. The CMYK meters are pretty accurate. Now, they're not perfect, and I guess the question is, well, if it's not perfect, how good is it? Well, next time you see something on your monitor, print it out on your printer, and then hold that paper next to the monitor and take a look. It is very, very, very close. Now, what about the RYB? The last time I looked, or last week when I looked, I could only find 4 or 5 programs on smartphones that were available that did RYB, and most of them had some issues. I want to go over some of these issues. Some of these apps, and this is going to be your question if you're going to download an app, some of them were worthless. They always maintain the same values in RGB, for red and blue compared to RYB. The only thing they did was just change, the yellow a little bit from what the green was. And why is that a problem? Well, they don't seem to understand that the green and red light make yellow, are missing secondary, our primary in dyes. Now, I did find quite a few that did understand that, but they made another tragic mistake. You must understand that when the RGB values are high, that means we're close to white. The way you get close to white in dyes is that you don't have that much dye. In other words, the numbers are somewhat inverse from one another. When red, yellow, and blue are high, RGB should be low. And some people didn't actually understand that. Now, there are a lot of others, that do understand that, and those would be really useful for those people that are doing spot dyeing, for example. If it says add more yellow or add more blue, it's probably dead on that. Now, there is a level that I worked on that carried it one step beyond that, and that is, the fact that there are more than 3 hues in the RYB theory. Now, we don't talk about that too often, but surely if you have taken CRT from an IICRC instructor, they told you that there are 3 colors, 3 primary colors, and you accepted that. But the reality was, when you sat down to do the color repair, did you not have a propensity to use something called light blue, sky blue, evening blue, more so than regular blue? Was there not a pink and a red? And were you not told that you could it would not be practical to dilute the red, to try to get pink, because you never will? And you will never be able to take the pink and make it strong enough to look like a red. That's the reality of textile dyeing. And it's not something that we generally talk about, but as I looked at the mathematics of this, the math was saying to me that there are 5 primaries. So the best apps, and what you're going to start seeing more of, is apps that actually have pink and light blue that are built into the algorithm. That is what I was able to achieve. That is what we're introducing in the form of a white paper. This is what the developers of apps are beginning to do. Now, how many apps do that? 1 so far as of yesterday on the Android system. And let me give you an example of that. You're looking at a screenshot here of a gray carpet. This gray carpet actually is over illuminated. Look at the degrees Kelvin, under the left side. It's pretty close to 10,000. Where was it supposed to stop? It was supposed to stop at 6,500. But take a look at the values, on the orange square that's over something black. Yellow, for example, is going from 29% to 92%. Blue's going from 30% up to 94%. In other words, the values are higher. And what does it mean when they're higher? That this is a stain. In reality, this is actually an oil stain. It's based upon some tar or some spray paint. By the way, later we're going to discuss the fact that this has no contrast in pH. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, pH is always based upon water-based solutions. That means if I'm going to get a spotter out of my spotting kit, I don't use anything that's water-based. I only use dry solvents. It's a dry solvent stain. Let's look at another situation. Brown carpet. Okay, now you're looking at this and you're saying brown. Yeah, Jim, are you going to call that a brown? Or it's kind of like a brown gray. You know, take a look at this case at the temperature. The temperature here is 4,645 degrees Kelvin. Is that white? Yes, kind of. Well, why kind of? Well, it's not daylight. If it's not daylight, then you're not going to see the true color of the carpet. But is the data useful? Well, yes. Take a look at the percentages. Red has gone from 92% down to 35%. Yellow, now this, I'm going to have to explain some things here later, has gone from 7 to 31, and I see that my color loss, my discoloration is yellow, and blue has gone from 78 to 42%. In other words, what is this saying to me? It's saying that this is not a stain. This is a color loss. Take note too, and this is really important for those of y'all that do color repair. There is no percentage of cyan or light blue or pink in this. In other words, what dyes are you going to use to put the color back in? Your strong red, your regular red, and your regular blue. And what else should you do before you start this color repair? You need to make this a little brighter. And take a look at the bottom here. There's a flash. I could have turned on the flash of the camera and it's off. That would make the difference. That would put me into the white light. Okay, let's go over to this next slide and spend a few minutes with this. What is a pH and an ORP meter? And why do I need that along with this color meter? Well, they measure what is called the propensity, not the actual event, but the propensity for chemical reactions. Now, don't assume at this point that you know what a chemical reaction is. A chemical reaction makes a new substance. Well, let me carry this one step further. I have to explain what a new substance is. A substance is going to be one kind of atom or molecule. Okay, so most of y'all probably didn't take chemistry, okay, but here would be a question, is milk a substance? No, milk is not a substance. It's a blend of substances. For example, my wife has lactose intolerance. Lactose is a substance inside of milk, So stains are generally going to be either physically bonded to a fiber or they're going to have chemically reacted with it to make a new substance. So let me explain why we need both of these numbers, because I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the pH. But let me explain really and truly what pH is. It is about substances that do not have an even bounce between their electrons and protons. Okay, now cut me a little allowance here to understand protons. Picture an atom in your head. And what do you see? I see a nucleus that has protons and neutrons in the center, and I see electrons going around that nucleus. Okay, in chemistry, in physics, the number of electrons and protons are generally equal. Okay, but if you lose electrons, or you gain them, then what we end up saying about that substance is that it's either going to be a proton donor or a proton receiver. If you want the more accurate definition of acids, they are proton donors. Alkalines are proton receivers. So why do we have to put it in those terms? Because in the redox reaction, which is different from the ionization reactions where we have bleach, and you should know there's quite a difference between bleach and an alkaline and an acid. They are electron transference. Oxidizers lose electrons, reducers gain electrons. Now, let's get down into the practical. This is what I really have not liked about chemistry, is that it's all been theoretical. I want to show you a video of how a pH meter works. Now, the video, we're not trying to promote a product, here, but the video is courtesy of a company called X-Tech that does make quite a few meters for our industry. So let's give them a few minutes, and they have kept this pretty generic, I think.
The X-Tech pH 100 flat surface electrode has many features and benefits that make it ideal for use in carpet cleaning. The unique, rugged, flat surface electrode with no glass bulb construction allows you to read pH levels of fabric and carpet with a minimal amount of moisture. The pH of a spot or stain can be determined to aid in the selection of the best approach to removing the problem. Simply use these easy steps to determine the pH of the affected area. Use a pH meter that has a flat surface electrode, such as the X-Tech pH 100 from X-Tech. Step 1. Calibration. If the electrode is new or hasn't been used for a while, condition it in a buffer solution, such as a pH 4 or 7, for approximately 10 minutes. Rinse the electrode in water, and then calibrate the meter in pH 7 buffer solution and press the cal button. The cal display will appear, and the reading will flash for a few seconds to stabilize. When calibration is completed, end will appear along with the buffer reading. If necessary, a second or third point calibration can be made using buffers 4 and 10 by simply repeating step 1. Step 2. Preparing the sample. Use a trigger spray bottle to apply a mist of water to the carpet and then to the affected spot. Use caution not to add too much water, as this will alter the pH of the carpet or fabric. Then, with a clean bone scraper, agitate the areas for testing. Note: using a towel or your hand is not recommended, for it can alter the true pH readings by introducing other substances to the area. Step 3. Taking a measurement. Apply the calibrated pH meter electrode to the area to be tested. Agitate the facer with the probe for best reading results. Take 3 to 4 readings and use the last reading as the true pH. The carpet is around 7 pH, and the affected area has a pH reading of 5.3. Generally, a cleaner does not need to know the exact pH, but only the range. Use this chart as a guide to determine how acidic the affected area is. The chart breaks down the pH into 5 ranges, from strongly acidic to strongly alkaline. Now we can analyze the stain with the pH reading we just obtained. It registered 3 to 6 pH with characteristics of being sticky. From this information, we can conclude that the stain is most likely food-related. You can then refer to your cleaning manual and decide what type of detergent is best used to treat this type of stain. After you are done measuring, simply rinse the electrode in water and dry it with a soft cloth or paper towel. Make sure that the sponge inside the protective cap stays moist with buffer 4 or 7 pH. This will maintain the pH electrode's functionality. Then put the cap on the electrode for safe storage. The pH X-Tech meter provides a quick way to analyze a problem in the fabric or carpet by determining the pH of the carpet prior to cleaning. By including a pH head in your inspection kit, it will communicate a level of professionalism that is beyond that of your competition. For more information on the X-Tech pH meter or the pH reference guide to the type of stain, refer to the X-Tech Simplified Operation and Sampling Procedures for Carpet and Fabric brochure, or visit our website at www.xtech.com/xtechcarpet.
So, once again, pH occurs when there's an uneven balance, between electrons and protons. Acids are proton donors, alkalines are proton receivers. Redox does not have to depend upon pH. Now, when there is a pH, most likely there's going to be a redox value too. But oxidizers lose electrons, reducers gain electrons. Now, with that said, I know that most of you, quite a few of you, have studied pH in the past. And if you have read many of the articles that I've written for CleanFacts, you probably have found too that I like to talk about the pseudo and the junk science, that is often taught. So let me share with you, and try to clarify some things, about pH. It is a pseudoscience. In other words, it's half true. It's not all the way true that the pH scale goes from 0 to 14. Okay, why? Because there are values above 14 and there are also values below 0. Will you ever see these values? No, but I don't think you're going to see 14 and 0 either. The scale actually is based upon 2 scales. pH is only measuring acidity. It means powers of 10 of hydrogen ions. Well, alkalines are based upon OH ions. And there is a pOH scale, that we don't hear too much about. You don't really need it if you're working off a pH scale. The actually precise definition of pH, now, this is pretty complicated. Forgive me for this, but here it is straight from the book. It is the negative common log, that means base 10, of active hydrogen ions, see the word ion, in solution. Or if you're going to write it out, as an algebraic expression, and maybe some of you might follow this, pH equals, negative logarithm power 10 hydrogen ions. In other words, if you had a 1% solution of acid, a 1%, now you don't often hear of acids talked about as being 1%, that would be negative log, 10 to the minus 2, which would be 2. Your pH would be 2. Now, why did I do that? To kind of lay a foundation for the junk science. In other words, things that were just made up that have very little to do with reality. And one of the biggest things about that is that a pH of 4 somehow or another is going to neutralize a pH of 10. Because why? Because they're both 3 places from neutral. And where did we get that? Well, it was inherent in teaching the pH scale, which was a half truth. The truth of the matter is the strength of an ionic solution is controlled by some other factors, primarily based upon something we call buffering. In fact, the IICRC standard, the current active standard, says that the pH of a product is going to be inadequate of knowing, its compatibility with the fibers or its dye. In other words, just because the pH is high or low, you really don't know for sure how much acidity or alkalinity is going to be there. That's why switching over to a pH meter is going to be more important, because you get the balance between what happened between acids and alkalines, and more important, you're looking at what's going on with the carpet. Now, to really understand pH, to really make it simple for everybody, even for the most common technician out there, you need a chart, and here's a chart. You can get access to this chart. This chart has passed numerous peer reviews. It was referenced twice in the journal. It was even referenced in the current IICRC standard. Let's look at just a couple of scenarios. On the top, I say we have a spot, and the pH of this spot is less than 3. And the color loss, there's color loss in this spot. Well, I can now determine that this color loss came from a strong acid, like hydrochloric or carbonic acid, sulfuric acid. To repair this, how would I do that? Well, I'm not going to put a bleach neutralizer on this. That would be a big mistake. I need to neutralize this, so somewhere between 6 and 8. Let's come down to the bottom. Once again, I have a spot with color loss, but now the pH, off the carpet is over 9.5. Well, this could be an oven cleaner. It could be fresh bleach, it wouldn't be old bleach, and if it is, I need to neutralize this because my ORP values are going to be very high too, and then come back and do the color repair on it. So to understand this ORP, which perhaps is a little alien to most of us, it's measured in a unit that I'm well familiar with called millivolts. like the same terminology that we use with batteries. We measure the power of batteries in volts. Now we're just going to measure them in millivolts, which is 1/1000th of a volt. So where's neutral on this scale? Well, neutral would be, starting from 0. Negative values are going to be our reducing bleaches. Positive ones are going to be oxidizers. What would be the typical reading of most carpets? Well, probably between 0 and 255. So why is carpet always going to be, generally speaking, measured as an oxidizer? Well, it's coming from ozone in the air itself. The air has oxygen. Now, let's take something that a lot of us are going to be familiar with, sodium bisulfite. That's a substance that's used as a bleach neutralizer. When you do find bleach, you do understand you do not want to neutralize that bleach with ammonia or some other product. The only suitable bleach neutralizer for our industry is sodium bisulfite. Well, now we have a negative value of negative 195. By the way, all reducers tend to go bad. What about these new products who are pulling out red dye stains? Not to promote a particular product, but like Red One, Red Zone, Red Magic, Stain, stuff like that. Their ORP values are going to be from like negative 450 to negative 800 or even lower than that. Let's go over to the other side, to oxidation. 3% hydrogen peroxide that we use, from the pharmacy has an ORP of 360. When you're looking at the spotters that are designed for removing stains, things like Stain One, Stain Magic, Stain Zone, they're based upon hydrogen peroxide. They're going anywhere from 450 to over 800 millivolts. That's how this scale works. So how do we use pH and ORP values to understand color loss and stains? Well, in general, and I think most of us understand this, that a slight, acidity helps stabilize dyes in carpet. Now, wool starts to bleed, and if y'all have questions on this later, ask, at around 5.9. If you put a pH meter on wool, you should be seeing something between 2.5 and 5.5 because of the nature of wool. A nylon carpet, that has been repeatedly cleaned for years, with something inappropriate, and now has a pH over 10, will generally start to lose blue. In other words, nylon is generally more color fast and able to hang on to its dyes more so than wool. In general, a negative ORP value below, say, 460 will destroy red. And that's important to understand. In general, not always, but in general, red. Ones that are going over 460 on the oxidation side tend to destroy blue dyes. Now, what about the stains? Well, if a stain is just physically bonded to the fiber, it is due in large part to extreme pH and ORP values. In other words, if you want to know how to pull out a stain, take a look at the pH and ORP values. And how do you neutralize? Well, let me go through 4 substances that I'm going to recommend that are somewhat generic. And the reason I'm picking these substances is because they're self-neutralizing in most of the time, and they're volatile. So if I see a high pH, acidic acid, somewhere between 5 and 7% would be my preferred product. How dangerous is it to use acetic acid? Well, acetic acid essentially is white vinegar. When they are acidic, then ammonium hydroxide. Why ammonium hydroxide? Also volatile, turns into ammonia and evaporates. What about oxidation? If I find that I've lost color, because of bleach and the bleach is still active, well, sodium bisulfite, which for most of you is going to be your coffee and tea stain remover, your coffee stain remover. Check the label to make sure. And what about when we actually have reduction? Then we neutralize that with hydrogen peroxide. So let me give some examples. Household bleach is an alkaline oxidizer. So it's 2 things. It has 2 propensities for chemical reactions. Its alkalinity and its oxidation. How do you get both numbers back towards neutral? you know, with an acidic reducer. In other words, sodium bisulfite. Let's take on another scenario. Let's talk about a stain, a food stain. Food is a reducer. That's why we eat food, you know, is so that it can react with the air that we're breathing and make heat. You know, so what would be the best products to use on food stains? Well, they would be alkaline oxidizers. You know, if you just use one or the other, you're headed in the right direction. If you can find something that has both, even better. You know, let's take a look at a rust stain. Now, rust is alkaline in its oxidation. And since rust, you know, is typically removed with real strong acids like azotic or phosphoric. And anytime you use an acid like that, it's very important that you neutralize it, rinse it, okay? Or else we're going to leave something very undesirable in the carpet. However, how many of you have discovered that there are newer products out there that that can make rust invisible and water soluble, and they don't use strong acids? If they're not using strong acids, what in the world are they doing? They're using the chemistry of reduction. You know, you only have to get one of these right. Now, this is a good one to look at too. Oil. I have oil stains on this. Okay. The thing to understand about everything that is based upon oil, you know, whether it be paint, makeups, or whatever, is that they do not have a contrast in pH. And if you have a technician in the field and you're looking at a stain and you moisten it down with some water and take the readings, you see no contrast. That means you either need to use a dry solvent or an oleophilic absorbent to remove that, or probably both, or certainly the dry solvent and a towel to pick that up. You don't have need of anything that is water-based. Now, take a look at this. Mr. Sun is shining down on this carpet. I see a sliding glass door, and I see that the color is primarily gone on the section next to the glass. What would meters tell me about this? Well, we call this a natural color loss, a color loss either from sunlight or from the atmospheric gases, the air itself. These type of problems are never going to have a contrast, you know, in pH, but they might have a contrast in ORP. This particular situation would show a very high ORP while the sun is hitting the carpet. Now, that won't be stable, and there's nothing to neutralize in this kind of situation. You get out your color meter, find the appropriate dyes to put back in, and this problem is fixed. Now, here's another one I want you to pay attention to. Study this photograph very carefully, and you're going to see that the normal color of this carpet, which appears to be a multi-tone, is kind of a reddish brown, you know, or tan, and there's a straight line of green fiber. So green next to a reddish brown. What color am I missing here? I'm missing the red. Now, in this case, if we have straight lines, we have no contrast in pH or ORP values running in the direction of manufacturing, in the direction the carpet was made. What does this mean? This is a problem that showed up after cleaning. It means that the dye never made a chemical reaction with the fiber. And frequently, this is the kind of thing that's revealed after cleaning. In other words, with the fact that it is straight and with my meters, I could determine, you know, that this is a manufacturing related problem. You know, frequently you'll find too that the fluorochemical protectants didn't make a bond to the fiber either, which is another indication that this would be a manufacturing related situation. So that is what I have to present to you today. This is the end of the presentation, and I'm now open for questions.
Thank you, James, for an amazing and very informative presentation. And thanks to all of you, our attendees, for listening and participating and sending in your questions. Looks like we've got quite a few. So James, I'll just start right off. Our first question here today is, how does adding oxygen or removing oxygen actually take out stains?
Well, I think to simplify this, we say that our blood is red, and yet when I look at the veins in my arms, I see blue-green. So in general, oxygen controls the color of things. Now, keep in mind the definition I gave for oxidation reduction did not always depend upon, oxygen itself, the substance oxygen. It depended upon the transfer of electrons. And one of the mistakes that we made in the past is, which is kind of a pseudoscience, is to say that oxidizers, reducers are always based upon oxygen. Don't be surprised in the future when manufacturers actually get away from oxygen and use something that's different. But, consider this too. If I burn a white piece of paper, chemical reactions take place, the paper changes colors. So in a manner of speaking, oxygen has a lot to do with the color of things. For example, do you see rust on the carpet? What is the rust? It's iron oxide, generally speaking. What does the spotter actually do to it? It removes the oxygen, possibly replaces it with something like phosphate. What's the color of phosphate in water? It's like salt in water. It's clear. It doesn't have a color. So that's how oxygen controls the color of things.
Thank you, James. Our next question here is, who sells pH and ORP meters?
Well, I'm not trying to promote a product. And X-Tech, pointed out that you do want a flat surface meter. Now, just recently, some friends emailed me with questions about some pH meters and said, is this appropriate? And one of these meters actually was about $130, which was a little pricey. That's a little bit more than what the X-Techs are. But it had a sensor that was recessed inside of a chamber. And the intent of that is the manufacturer for that technology does not want anything touching the sensor, the glass ball, where the pH actually is going to be taken. So it doesn't really matter whose brand you buy. We're not, once again, I'm not trying to promote a particular product, but you do want to avail yourself to the technology of flat surface meters that are designed to be pressed onto a surface. That's what you want to do. And also, keep it calibrated. ORP meters do not need calibration. pH meters do. And by the way, the new technology is electronic. In the old days, we had to take tiny little screwdrivers and stick them in the back of a little hole in the back of the meter while inside of a buffered solution and trying to tweak them to pH 7. Be grateful that all that is electronic now. It is so much easier.
Thank you. Our next question is, when will color meter apps be available that have the improved accuracies?
I just got the first Android, program, which was called Color Mix, and that was one word, and it was by a company called Ramil Tech, RAMELTEC. And I wrote him today, in fact, this morning, and said, when will you have an iPhone version? And he said in approximately 30 days. Also, there are some iPhone versions now, but they're kind of using the fourth generation algorithm. And one of them, is called Color Assist, one word, COLOR ASIST. And if you look that one up, I think there are 3 versions of it. There's a free version, one for 99 cents and one for $12. You want the one for the iPhone that is 99 cents. When you first open that up, you're only going to see RGB values. You'll need to go into the control panel and you'll see that you can turn off RGB or leave it on and turn on RYB. But that is still very useful, for doing color repair or making evaluations. By the way, on your paperwork, if you are going to write down the values for color, always use the RGB because we're all going to be on the same page regardless of the algorithms. So there'll be more coming. You know, the white paper is going out for peer review, and also we're planning on submitting this to the CIE.
Thank you. Our next question here is, why can't one use a CMYK meter instead?
Well, the CMYK meter has limited use. You know, the C is close to being blue. You know, the magenta has kind of a reddishness to it. You know, the problem is when you mix magenta and yellow together, they make red. You know, so if your color law situation begins to get a little complicated, you're in a different theory. You know, it's like trying to compare languages. You know, I live here in Texas, and I primarily just speak English. You know, but our friends to the south speak Spanish. Do I understand what they're saying? Well, you know, out here, so many of the Spanish words are so close to being like English that yes, I do, you know, but unless you're speaking the right language, you know, you don't get the right results. You don't get the total meaning. So I know that color repair advanced tremendously, you know, when people start considering the CMYK meters, but they're very limited. You know, they lead you down the wrong path. You know, it's like trying to pour diesel into an internal combustion engine designed for gasoline. You know, it's just the wrong number system. You don't get the right results.
Thank you. We have time for one last question today. Thank you everyone for sending in your questions. This last question is, who is the target market for color repair?
Well, definitely, you know, the buildings. You know, the last stats I looked at said that residential usage of nylon has dropped down to, you know, second or third place, somewhere around 20 some odd percent. Commercial, on the other hand, is still hanging in there at more than 51%, you know, nylon. So color repair for commercial, you know, carpet is essential. Keep in mind, though, that even though recent sales in the residential market, you know, have been going down, you know, the vast majority of all the carpet in residences is still nylon. And if you've been to the carpet store to see what nylon costs, you want to keep that. So what doing a patch, you know, is not an option. Color repair is. And there's still a good business, you know, in that. The thing you need to keep in mind is that the technology for doing color repair is the same tools and same terminal, you know, things that we use to do stain removal. So you want to be open to doing both.
Thank you. Thank you, James, so much for a very educational, amazing, and very informative presentation. Thank you again so much to our audience for participating and asking your questions. Just a reminder that attendees today will receive a copy within a week in an email from ISSA to view the recording. And if you're an ISSA member, you can go to issa.com/TV next week and view this webinar recording for yourself. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week. Bye for now.